Sup guys, it's the Stick Figure Historian again, and we're jumping back into the England series. So you remember back in episode 17, King and King Alone, when I told you about Queen Henrietta's new influence on Charles after the death of Villiers? Well, the time has come for us to see the fruit of it. Simply put, it wasn't pretty. As Parliament and many others had feared, Henrietta was trying to make England Catholic. Of course, it wasn't as if she was outright demanding conversions and threatening people. No, it was much more tricky than that. The Queen made friends with the noblemen's wives, and soon they began to admire her. She made these ladies think that being a Catholic was fashionable, and convinced many of them to convert. In turn, these women went home and persuaded their husbands to accept the Queen's religion. It was a very sneaky thing to do, but it worked. Catholics had been repressed in England for quite some time now, but Henrietta wanted this to change. She had a grand, beautiful chapel built at Somerset House, and here she began to openly worship in the way she saw fit. She pitied the persecuted secret Catholics of England, and honored those who had been killed for that faith. Many of these secret Catholics, also known as recusants, took heart when they watched the changes. If the Queen could celebrate Mass openly without being punished, then why couldn't they? To Parliament, it seemed their worst nightmare was coming true. Could England really become Catholic once more? Now, at this point, you're probably wondering what all this fuss is about Catholics. Shouldn't people be able to worship God how they believe is right? And yes, you're right, they should. No one should persecute anyone for what they believe. It seems silly for Protestant Parliament to be so afraid of Catholics, but there was really a good reason for this fear. The Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, always wants to control everything, and to control everything completely. He has always cruelly persecuted and killed anyone that disagreed with him, even before there was a such thing as a Protestant. But when the Great Protestant Reformation began, around 1517, this began a very serious attack on the Pope's power. And, actually, this is the current Pope Francis. The Pope at the start of the Reformation was actually this guy, Leo X. Ever since that time, more and more nations and people have broken away from his tyranny and had begun to worship differently. To try and stop this, the Pope decided to start his own reformation, the counterreformation. Through many different ways, including a wily, wicked group of men called Jesuits, the Pope was trying to take back his power and rebuild the old Catholic Church. And this here is actually a painting of the founder of the Jesuits, Ignatius Loyola. Crazy guy, really. And what exactly is he looking at anyway? Butterflies? I don't know. Anyway, it was this popish plot that Parliament was afraid of, not so much the regular Catholic people themselves. And Henrietta was undoubtedly a part of this plot. Before she had come to England to marry Charles, the Pope himself had asked her to help him make the country Catholic again. He even called her the savior of the English people. And a few of the private French priests she had brought along from her own country were actually evil Jesuits. And they truly are evil. They have been involved in a lot of terrible plots in history. I promise you'll hear more about them sometime. So, though none of this means it is right to persecute Catholics, we can yet understand the fear the Protestants had of them. The threat to their lives and freedom was very real. But here I shall change the subject and speak once more of Scotland, for again we find these neighboring countries share a story. Archbishop Laud's reforms were not well received in England, but matters were even worse in terms of Scotland. The Kirk, which is the Scottish word for their state church, was quite different from the Anglican Church, and certainly much more independent. They didn't like anyone telling them what to do. So when King Charles ordered that Laud's new prayer book must be used in their churches, it caused immediate uproar. This wasn't the first time the king had intervened with the Kirk. and a lot of people were rather weary of it. There was bound to be trouble, and it was going to be big. It all started with a flying stool. Yep, in other words, it was a seat being used as a projectile. It was this way. On a bright summer Sunday in 1637, a Scottish woman named Jenny Geddes went to attend church at St. Giles Cathedral. She sat and listened as the minister conducted the service, just as he usually did. But suddenly, he did something new. He pulled out the new prayer book and started reading from it. Now, Jenny was one of the Scots that believed the king had no right to tell the church what to do. And she was mad. "False thief!" she cried. "Do you dare say the Mass in my ear?" And before the astonished crowd, she picked up the little stool upon which she had sat and... Yep, she really did just do that. She chucked it straight at the minister's head. Yeah. And this here is a drawing depicting the event. And the cathedral, St. Giles, where it happened, is actually still standing in Edinburgh today. The fervor was catching, and soon many other people were throwing things at the minister and all shouting. The quiet church congregation of before turned into a rioting mob, and that riot spread all across the country. Many of the Kirk leaders got together and wrote a declaration called the National Covenant. "The Kirk shall govern herself," they said. "We will obey the king in matters of state alone." But the covenant wasn't just empty words. These men were determined to defend it with their own blood. Thousands of men were up in arms for the cause. But would the king listen?